People still say a tunnel runs under the old Chinatown block at 3rd and J. Tour guides point at purple glass squares in the sidewalk and call them proof of a hidden tunnel network. Here's the deal. The tunnels are legend. The erasure is documented. So we went looking at the same paper trail. Voice of San Diego and other local historians have dug through before. The maps, the inspection files, the same kinds of records the city later used to justify what happened to this neighborhood. And the deeper you go into those records, the less the tunnel question seems to matter. Because while everyone's underground looking for a tunnel story, they're missing what happened above ground. The documented story is that the district was condemned, targeted for cleanup, and between 1912 and 1916, 120 structures were removed in the stingery during the campaign that nearly wiped Chinatown out. The result was empty land. So, the tunnels may be the wrong question. The bigger one is why the neighborhood disappeared so completely that the myth outlived the place. If you've ever walked through the parking lots, or the nightlife district there now, you were standing on top of that erasure and you wouldn't even know it happened. Sanborn fire insurance maps recorded every structure, basement, and alley, so insurance companies could set premiums. Historians describe the 3rd and J block as packed with narrow wooden buildings, shared walls, and ground floor shops with rooms below street level. Laundries, boarding houses, and merchant shops stood close enough that a fire in one building would have jumped to the next in minutes. Sanborn maps note basements and openings because they change fire risk. And the sheets for this block show exactly what you'd expect: buildings, basements, and alleys, and no tunnel network anywhere in the district. The maps never recorded a tunnel, but they did record exactly what the rooms above were used for. By 1880, census records counted 202 people living in San Diego's Chinatown. A number Murray Lee, former curator of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, calculated it at around 2 to 3% of the entire county's population at the time. Voice of San Diego cites Lee's research directly. That population needed room to work. The law made sure they didn't get it. The Chinese Exclusion Act, along with San Diego's own ordinances and restrictions, helped confine Chinese residents and businesses south of Market Street. So, the whole community got squeezed into one footprint. The San Diego Archaeological Center describes it as an 8-block district running roughly between Market and J. From 2nd Avenue to 6th, the restriction hit hardest at the center. That's the block around 3rd and J. The buildings stood closest together there because there was nowhere left to spread. The Sanborn maps show basements under nearly every building, packed tight, sharing walls. That part's documented. What's not documented is any tunnel connecting them. The density made it plausible some of those basements connected through a doorway or a gap knocked between shared walls. The records don't confirm it. That gap between plausible and documented is where the ghost tunnel story starts. Picture a merchant's counter with a trapdoor cut into the floor, and overhead, purple glass squares in the sidewalk letting light down into the cellar. Not a tunnel stretching for blocks, just a floor hatch and a pane of glass. People walked over it every day without knowing what was under it. Newspaper reporters covering opium raids described hidden rooms behind false walls, trapdoors dropping into storage cellars. That's a cellar, not a tunnel. But the darkness and the secrecy did the rest, and a hidden cellar turned into a story about a full network bigger than anything the maps could support. Here's what the records don't show. No tunnel marked on any Sanborn sheet for this block. No tunnel plan sitting in the city's permit files. No primary document anywhere that confirms a network connecting those basements. The Sanborn surveyors tracked basements because basements changed fire risk. So a tunnel running under multiple buildings is exactly the kind of thing they would have marked. It's not there. The absence isn't an oversight. It's the evidence. So that density wasn't just a neighborhood trait. It was the direct result of a legal cage. And that same density is what made the neighborhood easy to erase later. Because a few packed blocks are a much smaller target than a spread out one. That same compression handed the city its excuse. By 1912, officials were getting ready for the Panama, California Exposition. It was set to run in Balboa Park from 1915 to 1916, and they wanted San Diego looking clean for the tourists coming to see the canal celebration. A packed, visibly poor block was easy to point at, easy to condemn. So the Stingery and Chinatown had to go. A historical account shows that by the early 1910s, the Stingery was already under pressure as a district the city wanted cleaned up. The Exposition didn't create that argument. It gave it a deadline. Health code violations became the legal tool, the same way property ordinances had done the job a generation earlier. A Journal of San Diego history account says that between 1912 and 1916, Bellin supervised the removal of 120 structures in the Stingery. Walter Bellin was the city health inspector running the cleanup. By the end of the campaign, he claimed the waterfront had been cleaned up, the stingery wiped out, and Chinatown had almost disappeared. The health code was the mechanism, and the land it cleared became far more useful to the city once the neighborhood was gone. Inspectors claimed they'd been lenient and said they helped residents relocate. The buildings came down either way. The relocation wasn't the point. The empty land was. By the 1930s, what was left of Chinatown held a mixed population: Chinese, Japanese, white and black residents, working the same blocks, just not the concentrated community the maps once recorded. After World War II, Chinese immigrants could finally become citizens and buy property, and what remained scattered across the city. Los Angeles kept its Chinatown. San Francisco kept its. San Diego tore most of its down and forgot it was ever there, even though the maps and the census records never left the archive. San Diego does have tunnels. UCSD, Balboa Park, the border, none of them are this. So here's the breakdown, laid out the way the receipts actually support it, in 3 tiers. Documented. The Sanborn maps show basements under nearly every building on the block, shared walls and alleys running behind the storefronts. That's on paper. Nobody's arguing about it. Inferred. The density and shared walls make it plausible some basements connected, through a doorway or a gap between them. No map confirms it. Legend. Everything past that point is where the story stopped following the paper trail. The opium dens complicate things. They really were hidden by design, tucked behind false walls, accessed through trapdoors. Those dropped into low-ceilinged rooms, narrow bunks, bad air. Newspaper readers 100 years ago read about that. They pictured catacombs running under the whole district. What they were actually reading about was a back room with a low ceiling and a few mats on the floor. Stack those 3 tiers up and the gap is obvious. Documented. Buildings, basements, alleys. Inferred. A few cellars that might have connected. Legend. A tunnel network running under the whole block. The ghost tunnels of 3rd and J are what moved in after the neighborhood was pushed out. When a neighborhood disappears, legends move in to fill the space it left behind. But some of the buildings refuse to disappear. First, the city erased the neighborhood. 60 years later, they nearly erased the proof that it ever existed. Downtown redevelopment in the 1980s nearly finished the job. Ray Brandis, evaluating the area for the city's redevelopment agency, scored the Chinese mission just 18 out of 50 and argued too little had survived to save. That's documented in the Journal of San Diego History, on screen now. It mirrored the same pattern from decades before. The community fought back with petitions, hundreds of signatures, packed city meetings. A later engineering study contradicted Brandis. It found that most of the buildings were structurally sound and recommended keeping them in place. In 1987, the city passed a resolution approving the Chinese Asian Thematic Historic District. It includes the Chinese Mission Building as one of the district's contributing historic structures. Later, the building was saved and relocated to 404 3rd Avenue, where it became the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. You can visit it today at 404 3rd Avenue. One building carried that history forward, while the rest of the neighborhood was stripped away. The myth survived because the neighborhood didn't. Once the buildings were gone, there was nobody left to correct the story, so it just kept growing in the empty space the city left behind. If you've got photos of the sidewalk glass squares, access to a downtown basement near 3rd and J, old building permits, permit drawings, or a Sanborn sheet link for this block, don't sit on it. Put it in the comments. That's the only way the record gets fixed instead of just repeated. And if you want the next case,